My name is Sarah Marshall, and I am 28 years old. Exactly 1 week before I was supposed to walk down the aisle in a custom lace gown, my fiancé looked me dead in the eye and told me he had to work late at the firm. He was lying. That single, calculated lie didn't just end our relationship. It shattered a 7-year illusion and exposed a web of betrayal that involved the people I trusted most. Instead of crying in secret or quietly canceling the catering, I waited. I stayed silent for 7 grueling days, letting him believe his perfect, high-society wedding was going exactly according to plan. Then, in front of 200 sitting guests, family members, and his wealthy business partners, I unsealed an envelope that turned his meticulously crafted empire completely upside down. Before we get into the details of that evening, please take a quick moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with your own experiences. And drop your city and local time in the comments below. I always love knowing exactly where you are listening from. Now, let me take you back to the crisp autumn morning of October 2024, to a small, cluttered kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, and the last time I ever felt completely safe in my own skin. Growing up, I wasn't built for high-society ballrooms or country club luncheons. My dad, Arthur Marshall, spent 32 years working as a mechanic at a regional transit garage. His hands were permanently stained with engine oil, and he smelled like WD-40 and coffee. My mom, Eleanor, ran a small, struggling daycare out of our basement, wiping noses and patching knees for the neighborhood kids. They were salt of the earth, quiet people who valued 2 things above all else: absolute honesty and keeping your word. If you made a promise in the Marshall house, you kept it, even if it broke you. I inherited their stubborn streak. I wasn't glamorous, but I was focused. I put myself through a rigorous dental hygiene program, working the night shift at a 24-hour diner to avoid drowning in student debt. By 25, I had a stable job at a private practice, a modest savings account built dollar by dollar, and a clear, simple vision for my future. I thought a life built on honest, hard work was the only kind that mattered. Then I met Julian Vance. Julian was a corporate defense attorney at one of the oldest, most prestigious firms downtown. He was 31, tall, with sharp blue eyes and the kind of tailored charcoal suits that made him look like he had been born inside a boardroom. He had an effortless, magnetic charm that I wasn't used to. He pulled out chairs, bought me obscure poetry books because I mentioned a favorite line on our first date, and took me to high-end Italian restaurants where the tasting menu cost more than my weekly groceries. The Vance family belonged to a completely different universe. They were old money, 3 generations of judges, politicians, and real estate developers. Their name was prominently stamped on a hospital wing and a bronze plaque at the country club where they held court every Saturday. Julian's mother, Victoria Vance, was a terrifyingly elegant woman who permanently wore cream silk, pearls the size of grapes, and a cold, measuring smile that never quite reached her eyes. The first time Julian took me to their estate for dinner, Victoria looked at my off-brand shoes, tilted her manicured head, and sighed. "A dental hygienist? How functional, Sarah. I suppose every community needs someone to do the maintenance." It wasn't a compliment. It was a boundary line drawn in frost. But Julian squeezed my hand under the heavy mahogany table and whispered, "Don't worry about her, babe. She'll warm up once she realizes how much I love you." I believed him. When you are deeply in love, your brain finds a way to explain away the red flags you should be running from. You tell yourself it's just a clash of backgrounds. You tell yourself that the man who brings you medicine at midnight is the real version, and the elitist world he belongs to is just background noise. Julian proposed after 3 years of dating. It was a theatrical, grand gesture, a private rooftop terrace overlooking the city, a string trio playing soft classical music, and an antique diamond ring that had been passed down through the Vance family for 80 years. Victoria sat at a table across the terrace, watching the entire performance. At the time, Julian called it a beautiful coincidence. I nodded, slid the heavy platinum band onto my finger, and said yes anyway. But the moment the wedding planning officially started, the version of Julian I thought I knew began to blur. Victoria took complete control of the event. Our modest wedding at the historic church near my parents' home was instantly scrapped. Instead, she booked the grand ballroom at the Vance Country Club, an elite exclusionary venue with an $85,000 baseline price tag. She hired a high-end designer planner, chose an aggressive ivory and gold color palette, and dictated a strict, multi-course black tie menu. When my mother gently suggested adding her signature homemade sugar cookies to the dessert table, a recipe she had made for every major milestone in my life, Victoria laughed softly. "That's incredibly sweet, Alina, but this is a formal, curated gala, not a neighborhood bake sale." My mother smiled politely and let it go, but I saw the way her fingers tightened in her lap. Every time I tried to push back against the escalating madness, Julian would offer the exact same, polished response. "Just let my mom have this one, Sarah. It makes her happy. Once the wedding is over, it's just us. Our house, our rules. Let's just get through the party." I made a calculated, quiet decision to lose the small battles so I could win the long war. The venue didn't matter. The expensive flowers didn't matter. What mattered was the marriage, the 40 years of real life after the music stopped. I kept giving up ground, completely unaware that Victoria wasn't just planning a party. She was testing exactly how much of my dignity she could strip away before I finally broke. 1 week before the wedding, the final seating arrangements were finalized. On a rainy Tuesday night, exactly 7 days before the ceremony, I stopped by Julian's luxury apartment downtown to drop off the final guest count from my side of the family. He wasn't home yet. His key was exactly where it always was, hidden inside the decorative planter by his door. The apartment was dark, smelling faintly of his expensive sandalwood cologne and expensive takeout. I dropped my purse on the kitchen island and noticed his work laptop sitting open on the counter. Julian was paranoid about security, but he had left his personal email logged in. A notification popped up on the screen, a message from a name I recognized instantly. Chloe Vance, his second cousin by marriage, a wealthy, blonde socialite who spent her winters in Aspen and her summers on yachts in Italy. She was also one of the bridesmaids Victoria had forced me to include in the wedding party to keep the aesthetic cohesive. The subject line of the email read, "Next weekend." My chest tightened with a sudden, unexplainable dread. I am a rational person. I don't go through people's things, and I had never once checked Julian's phone in 7 years. But trust isn't a solid concrete block. It's a living thing, and mine had been slowly fraying under the weight of the Vance family's constant secrecy. I clicked the email. The text inside was short, devastating, and entirely unambiguous. "I can't believe we have to sit through this ridiculous farce next Saturday. Julian, you promised me this is just a business arrangement for your father's political optics. You told me she's just a temporary fixture until the estate clears. Tell me you love me again before you go back to her tonight. The hotel room in Chicago is booked under my name for our honeymoon extension." Attached to the email was a thread of messages spanning over 8 months. Photos. Explicit, intimate photos taken in hotel rooms, on weekend trips Julian claimed were for regional depositions. And inside the very cabin my father had helped Julian winterize last winter. 8 months of data. 8 months of calculated, daily deception. I stood in that dark, pristine kitchen, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting off my face. The silence of the apartment pulled back like a heavy tide. For 10 seconds I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs felt like broken glass. 7 years of my life, the diner shifts, the shared dreams, the late night talks about building a future together, were erased in the span of 3 sentences. I wasn't just a fiancé. I was an acoustic prop, a functional, middle-class distraction used to clean up his image for his father's upcoming judicial campaign, while he shared a bed with his own cousin's social circle. A soft click resonated from the front door. Julian's keys rattled in the lock. I closed the email window, stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, and watched as the man I was supposed to marry walked into the room, adjusting his tie, looking perfectly reasonable, perfectly handsome, and completely hollow. "Hey, babe," he said, offering that smooth, practiced smile. "You're here early. I had a brutal late session at the firm. I'm exhausted." He walked toward me, leaning in to kiss my cheek. He smelled like rain, expensive gin, and a faint trace of vanilla oat milk perfume. The exact perfume Chloe Vance had worn to our bridal shower 2 weeks ago. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his antique platinum ring at his chest. 7 years of working in emergency, dental extraction, and fast-paced diners had taught me a brutal, essential skill: how to freeze your face when a patient is screaming in pain. "Rough day?" I asked, my voice completely level. "The worst," he sighed, tossing his keys onto the counter right next to the laptop. "But hey, 1 more week and we're free. Just us, remember." "I remember," I whispered. I picked up my purse from the island, smiled beautifully, and walked out of the apartment before the tears could spill. I got into my old Subaru, locked the doors, and sat in the dark parking lot while the rain came down sideways against the windshield. My hands were freezing. My phone screen glowed with a text from my mother, asking if Julian liked the linen napkins she had bought for our rehearsal dinner. I didn't answer her. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the face of a woman who had just been completely erased from her own future. I had 2 paths forward. I could call my dad, blow up his phone, cancel the venue, and spend the next 6 days hiding in my childhood bedroom while the Vance family spun a narrative that I was unstable and couldn't handle the pressure of their world. Or I could give them exactly what they paid for: a massive, high-profile show. I started the engine, pulled out into the October storm, and began planning the final week of our engagement. The 6 days leading up to the wedding felt like an out-of-body experience. I went to work every single morning at the dental practice, cleaned teeth, polished enamel, and smiled at patients. My hands never shook. My voice never wavered. But inside, every gear in my mind was grinding down to a cold, sharp edge. I was no longer a bride-to-be. I was an operative executing a silent countdown. Julian called me every afternoon at exactly 3:00 p.m. checking in, performing the role of the attentive, stressed-out fiancé. "Baby, my mom is losing her mind over the floral arrangements for the entry stairs," he told me on Thursday, his voice echoing through his car, Bluetooth speaker. "She wants to swap the white hydrangeas for imported orchids. It's an extra $4,000. I told her to just do it so we don't have to hear about it." "Whatever makes Victoria happy," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "That's my girl," he murmured. "So easygoing. God, I'm lucky. Some women would be a total nightmare right now." I let out a soft, beautiful laugh. "You have no idea, Julian." After I hung up, I sat in my parked car in the clinic lot and pulled out my laptop. I had spent the last 3 nights meticulously downloading every single email, text thread, and explicit photo from the hidden archives of Julian's personal account. I didn't just copy them, I organized them. I created a master document, page by page, date by date. January 14th, the weekend Julian claimed he was at a legal retreat in Cincinnati. Chloe had checked them into a boutique hotel downtown under her maiden name. There was a photo of him holding a glass of champagne, smiling at the camera from a plush bed. March 22nd, the night of my own birthday dinner, which Julian had missed because of an emergency client deposition. The text thread showed him ordering room service with Chloe at a luxury suite just 3 blocks from the restaurant where I had sat alone with my parents. Every single entry was a physical blow to my chest, a brutal reminder that the last 7 years of my life had been a carefully choreographed lie. He had been sleeping with her while planning a life with me. He had been kissing my forehead and promising to love me forever while whispering to his cousin that I was just a temporary fixture to secure the middle-class vote for his father's judicial run. On Friday evening, the night of the rehearsal dinner, the tension inside me peaked. The dinner was held at an incredibly exclusive French restaurant downtown, reserved entirely for the Vance family and their high-profile inner circle. My parents arrived in their best clothes, my dad wearing the only dark suit he owned, which smelled faintly of dry cleaner fluid and cedar blocks, and my mom in a simple navy blue dress she had spent 2 weekends tailoring herself. The moment we walked in, Victoria Vance swept past us, her cream silk dress rustling like dry leaves. She stopped, looked my mother up and down with that icy, measuring smile, and patted her arm. "Eleanor, darling, what a charmingly conservative dress," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "So practical for an autumn evening. I'm glad you didn't feel pressured to overdress for our little family gathering." My mother's face flushed pink, but she kept her chin up, nodding politely. "Thank you, Victoria, it's very comfortable." I watched from 3 feet away, my jaw locked. Julian was standing behind his mother, laughing at a joke his father's campaign manager had just made. He didn't look over. He didn't intervene. He didn't pull his mother aside and say, "That's my future mother-in-law, treat her with respect." He just absorbed the cruelty as a natural part of his environment. He thought the Marshalls were lucky to be in the same room as the Vances, and he expected us to take the insults with a grateful smile. Chloe Vance sat directly across from me at the long banquet table. She looked stunning, tall, blonde, wearing a designer slip dress that cost more than my car. Throughout the entire 4-course dinner, she kept locking eyes with me, offering a sweet, performative smile while lifting her wine glass in silent toasts. "Sarah, you must be absolutely terrified about tomorrow," Chloe said, leaning forward, her diamond earrings catching the prismatic light of the chandelier. "Moving into Julian's world is a massive adjustment. It's so different from what you're used to. Let me know if you ever need help navigating the country club scene. I know how intimidating it can be for outsiders." "That is so incredibly generous of you, Chloe," I replied, holding her gaze across the crystal and silver. "I'll definitely remember that. You've always been so supportive of Julian and me." Under the table, my hands were clenched into fists, so tight my nails were driving into my palms. I could feel the digital files sitting on the flash drive in my purse, heavy as a brick. They thought I was a fool. They thought I was a small, quiet girl from a mechanic's family who would swallow their condescension because I was desperate for their name and their money. They had absolutely no idea that the girl they were mocking had spent the last 72 hours building a structural demolition plan for their entire family legacy. After the dinner, Julian drove me back to my apartment. He tried to come upstairs, leaning across the center console to kiss me, his breath warm with expensive red wine. "Can't wait for tomorrow, Mrs. Vance," he whispered, running a thumb along my jawline. I pulled back just an inch, offering a soft, tired smile. "I need to get some sleep, Julian. Big day tomorrow. I want everything to be perfect." "Get some rest, beautiful," he said, entirely satisfied with himself. "See you at the altar." I walked up the stairs to my apartment alone. The silence inside my living room was wedding days. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror under the harsh LED bar, and finally let the tears fall. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was a deep, violently painful breakdown that tore through my chest until my stomach ached. I cried for the 7 years I had thrown away. I cried for the naive girl who had believed every single midnight promise he made. I cried for the sheer, suffocating humiliation my parents were going to face when the dust settled tomorrow. I sat on the cold tile floor for nearly an hour, my knees pulled tightly to my chest, listening to the rain beat against the small bathroom window. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming, a heavy, dead weight pressing down on my shoulders. Part of me wanted to just pick up the phone, dial Julian's number, scream the truth at him, and end it right there in the dark. I wanted to crawl into my bed, pull the covers over my head, and pretend none of this was happening. But then I thought about my dad's stained hands. I thought about my mother's sugar cookies being dismissed as a neighborhood bake sale item. I thought about Chloe Vance booking a honeymoon extension in Chicago using the very future Julian had stolen from me. If I canceled the wedding privately tonight, Victoria Vance would ensure the narrative belonged entirely to them. By Monday, the country club circuit would hear that the middle-class dental hygienist had an emotional breakdown, that she couldn't handle the pressure of marrying a Vance, that Julian had graciously tried to save her, but she was simply too unstable. They would play the victims, clean up their optics, and move on to the next political campaign without a single scratch on their reputation. I wiped my face with a cold towel, stood up, and walked to my desk. My hands were perfectly cold, perfectly steady. I pulled out the original seating chart, the one Victoria had modified to push my family to the back rows near the service kitchen, and I made one final adjustment. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to let them see exactly who they had invited into their world. At 2:00 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a screenshot of a message Julian had sent to Chloe just 20 minutes prior, right after he dropped me off. I had set up a basic data forwarding rule on his legacy email account before I logged out, and the sync was still catching his outbound messaging logs. She's asleep. Tomorrow is just a performance, Chloe. 7 days of optics for Dad's judicial seat, then we can start organizing the quiet exit. Keep your dress unzipped after the reception dinner. I stared at the screen, a cold, clinical calm settling over me like a winter frost. The betrayal had completely stopped hurting. It had transformed into a clean, architectural necessity. I plugged the flash drive into my computer, hit print on a localized wireless machine, and watched as 12 high-resolution copies of his entire 8-month affair slid quietly onto the tray. I sorted them into thick, elegant cream envelopes, the exact envelopes Victoria had chosen for the formal wedding programs. I sealed each one with a heavy gold sticker, 12 verdicts ready to be handed down. October 17, 2024. The morning of the wedding arrived with a brutal, clear sky that made the autumn leaves look like fire against the concrete downtown. I woke up at 5:00 a.m. before the alarm could even go off. The apartment was entirely still, the air holding that specific, crisp chill that comes right before the seasons change. Hanging on the closet door was the custom lace gown, ivory satin, a long, flowing train, bought entirely with my own hard-earned savings. It was a beautiful dress, a symbol of a future that had completely ceased to exist. By 9:00 a.m., I was sitting in the bridal suite at the Vance Country Club. The room was a massive, opulent display of old-money luxury, plush velvet couches, gold leaf mirrors stretching from the floor to the ceiling, and silver trays piled high with fresh fruit and expensive champagne. Outside the massive arched windows, I could see the grand lawn where 300 white chairs were arranged in perfect, military-style rows, facing a massive altar constructed from white orchids. Victoria Vance moved through the suite like a general inspecting troops. She was dressed in a tailored champagne-colored gown, her signature pearl necklace catching the brilliant morning light. "Sarah, darling, your posture is looking a bit soft," Victoria said, adjusting my veil with a sharp, impatient tug. "Remember, the governor's chief of staff is sitting in the second row today. When you walk down that aisle, you represent the Vance name. Try to hold your chin higher. We don't want the photos looking like you're overwhelmed by the venue." "I won't drop my head, Victoria. I promise you," I replied, looking directly at her reflection in the gilded mirror. "I know exactly what I represent today." She offered a brief, satisfied nod, entirely missing the iron in my voice, and swept out of the room to go manage the arriving politicians. Half an hour later, the bridesmaids filed in, laughing and clinking their crystal flutes together. Chloe Vance was right in the center of them. She looked immaculate, her long blonde hair styled in a loose, elegant updo that perfectly showcased her diamond collarbone. She walked straight over to me, her slip dress rustling softly, and leaned down to hug my shoulders. The scent of her vanilla oat milk perfume filled my lungs, hot and sickeningly familiar. "Oh, Sarah, you look absolutely precious," Chloe whispered in my ear, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Like a real little princess. Julian is out there in his tuxedo looking like a movie star. Just try to breathe, okay? We'll make sure you don't trip over that massive train." "Thank you, Chloe," I said, turning my head slowly to look her dead in the eye. "You've always been so attentive to Julian's needs. I really appreciate how much care you've put into this entire day." Her smile flickered for a fraction of a second, a tiny, imperceptible hitch in her breathing, before she laughed it off and turned back to the other girls to pour more champagne. She thought I was simple. She thought the quiet mechanic's daughter was too eager for a seat at their table to notice the glances, the shared text messages, or the smell of her perfume on my fiancé's skin. At 11:45 a.m., My father walked into the room. He looked completely out of place in the grand velvet suite, his broad shoulders stiff inside the dry-cleaned dark suit, his thick, calloused hands holding a single white rose. He walked over to me, his boots clicking heavily on the polished floorboards, and his eyes welled up with a sudden, fierce pride. "You look beautiful, Sarah Bear," he said, using my childhood nickname, his voice rough and thick down the center. "Your mom is already out there sitting down. They put our family at tables 19 and 20, right near the back doors where the waiters come out. Your mom was a bit upset, but I told her it doesn't matter where we sit. We know who you belong to." My chest cracked open, a cold, sharp fury freezing the last traces of grief inside my blood. Victoria had moved my family to the absolute margin of the room, wedged between the kitchen exit and the emergency fire doors, so her high society political donors wouldn't have to look at grease-stained hands or homemade dresses during the reception dinner. They were using my parents' quiet decency as a mattress to soften their condescension. "It matters where we sit, Dad," I said quietly, reaching up to fix his tie, the same tie he had bought for my college graduation. "And trust me, today, everybody is going to see exactly where we belong." The ceremony began at noon. The brass doors of the country club opened, and the string ensemble shifted into a soaring, expensive arrangement of a classical wedding march. I stepped onto the white runner, my father's arm solid and steady under my hand. I looked down the long aisle. 300 faces turned toward me, judges, councilmen, real estate executives, women wrapped in furs and designer silk. And at the end of the runner, standing in front of the massive altar of orchids, was Julian Vance. He looked absolutely perfect. His black tuxedo was tailored flawlessly, his hair swept back, his teeth white and brilliant against his tan skin. He watched me approach with an expression of intense, practiced devotion, the face of a man who knew a camera was tracking his every micro-expression for his father's campaign brochure. When my father placed my hand in Julian's, Julian leaned in and whispered, "You look stunning, Sarah. Let's do this." I smiled beautifully, my fingers closing around his cold, heavy platinum ring. "Let's finish it, Julian." The vows went off without a hitch. Julian recited his script with theatrical precision, his voice dropping into a deep, emotional register when he promised to respect me, to honor me, and to remain faithful through every season of our lives. I watched his mouth move, watched the subtle, calculating glance he threw toward the front row where the political reporters were sitting, and I felt absolutely nothing. The man I had loved for 7 years was dead, replaced by a hollow architectural prop. When it was my turn, I read my vows from memory. Short, clear, and perfectly steady. I didn't mention love. I mentioned time. I mentioned promises. I mentioned the absolute, unyielding necessity of facing the truth. "I take you, Julian, with full knowledge of exactly who you are, exactly what you value, and exactly what you have built," I said, my voice carrying through the crystal-clear audio system across the silent lawn. "And I promise to give you exactly what you deserve." Julian grinned, completely oblivious, thinking it was just a poetic, modern spin on the traditional text. In the front row, Victoria dabbed her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, nodding her approval at the optics. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Julian leaned down, his mouth pressing against mine, smelling faintly of the expensive mints he kept in his vest pocket. The crowd erupted into applause, camera flashes detonating against the white orchids like tiny stars. We turned and walked down the runner together, hands clasped, the perfect, high society couple celebrating a 7-year fairy tale. But the marriage license, the legal, binding document that actually tied my name to his estate, was still sitting unsigned in a leather folio inside the coordinator's office. The plan was to do the formal signing at the sweetheart table during the first course of the reception dinner, in front of the entire room, as a performance of legal unity. Legally, I was still Sarah Marshall. Legally, I was completely free. As the guests filtered off the lawn and into the grand ballroom for the cocktail hour, Julian pulled me into the private holding room behind the main stage. He was glowing, his chest puffed out, completely wrapped in the adrenaline of his own success. "God, that was flawless, Sarah," he said, pouring himself a double shot of bourbon from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. "Did you see the Henderson group in the third row? My dad's campaign manager said they're preparing to drop a massive donation for the judicial run by Monday morning. This wedding just secured the entire Northern District optics." He downed the bourbon, took a deep breath, and looked at me, completely blind to the storm building in the corners of the room. "We just have to get through the reception dinner, do the license signing, give the speeches, and then we're out," he smiled, stepping closer to touch my waist. "Just a few more hours of playing the part, babe." I adjusted the gold, stickered envelope hidden inside the folds of my satin train, my voice sinking into a cold, lethal quiet. "The performance is over, Julian," I said. "The reckoning starts in 10 minutes. The grand ballroom of the Vance Country Club was a blinding spectacle of old-money opulence. Prismatic light from the massive crystal chandeliers danced across the silk tablecloths, gilded chargers, and towering centerpieces of imported white orchids. 200 guests, the city's business elite, high-profile politicians, and country club regulars, filled the room with a dense, low chatter. At table 1, the head table directly in front of the dance floor, Victoria and Richard Vance sat with the governor's chief of staff, radiating the absolute certainty of people who own the room. Julian and I were introduced to a roaring standing ovation, camera flashes detonating against the gold-rimmed decor as we walked toward the sweetheart table on the main stage. I looked toward the back corner of the massive room. Wedged tightly between the swinging kitchen door and an emergency exit fixture were tables 19 and 20. My father was sitting there, his spine straight, his calloused hands resting flat on his knees. My mother was quietly smoothing the lace on her homemade dress, flinching every time a waiter slammed through the service doors with a tray of hot appetizers. Julian pulled out my chair, entirely wrapped in his own arrogance. "Smile, Sarah," he whispered, waving to a prominent real estate investor at table 3. "The press photographer from the Business Journal is tracking us." I sat down, my hands cold, my fingers touching the heavy, cream-colored envelopes hidden beneath the folds of my satin train. Before the first course could even be cleared, the wedding coordinator, Diane, stepped up onto the stage carrying a leather folio. She laid it gently between our wine glasses, opening it to reveal the unsigned marriage license. The officiant stood beside her, a heavy gold pen in his hand, smiling down at us. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed through the pristine audio system, cutting through the dining room chatter. "If I can have your attention up front, we are about to witness the formal, legal signing of the marriage certificate. Let's raise a glass to the official union of the Vance and Marshall families." The room went quiet. Crystal glasses clinked. Julian picked up the gold pen, offering a brilliantly practiced smile to the cameras flashing at the edge of the stage. He scribbled his signature in a clean, sweeping motion, then slid the folder toward me. "Your turn, Mrs. Vance," he murmured, his eyes crinkling with that magnetic, empty charm. I looked down at the paper. I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I stood up slowly, stepping away from the sweetheart table, and walked straight toward the microphone at the center of the stage. The room shifted. A few muffled whispers broke out at the front tables. Julian's smile faltered, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. Victoria leaned forward from table 1, her glass held midair, her measuring smile tightening into a thin line. "Thank you all for being here today." My voice resonated through the hidden speakers, perfectly clear, completely level. "I know you came to celebrate a wedding, and I owe you the absolute truth about exactly what is being commemorated in this room." The last remnants of chatter died instantly. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto the stage. The silence in that ballroom became a physical, suffocating weight. "Most of you know me as Julian's fiancé," I continued, looking directly out into the crowd. "But before I was that, and long after I leave this building tonight, I am Arthur and Alina Marshall's daughter. My parents are currently sitting at tables 19 and 20. I'd like everyone to take a real look at the back corner of this room." Heads turned. The entire room shifted their gaze past the grand bar, past the elaborate ice sculptures, and found my parents sitting on standard folding chairs next to the clanging kitchen doors. My father spent 32 years fixing transit buses with grease-stained hands so I could go to school without debt, I said, my voice steady as a flat line. My mother spent her weekends sewing the lace onto her dress by hand because she wanted to look appropriate for the Vance family. And this morning, Victoria Vance decided that their presence was an embarrassment to her political optics. She moved them to the back of the room, near the garbage disposal, so the governor's staff wouldn't have to look at working-class people. A sharp, collective intake of breath rippled through the country club crowd. Victoria's face drained of color, her fingers gripping her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. Richard Vance stood up from his chair, his voice a low, strangled hiss. "Sarah, that is enough. This is an internal family matter. Sit down and let the dinner proceed." "Sit down, Richard," I said, not lifting my voice by a single decibel. "You had your turn to run the script. Now you're going to sit there and listen to the verdict." Julian stepped toward me, his hands reaching for my arm, his smooth corporate voice cracking at the edges. "Sarah, stop. You're having an emotional breakdown. You're stressed out from the planning. Just give me the microphone." "Do not touch me, Julian," I said, stepping back half a foot. My eyes locked onto his, and for the first time in 7 years, he saw the absolute lack of fear in my face. "Let's talk about the honeymoon extension you booked in Chicago, the one you arranged using the very future you stole from me." I reached into the cream envelope I had placed on the podium. I pulled out a high-resolution, printed copy of his 8-month email thread with Chloe Vance and held it directly up under the bright spotlight of the main stage. "I have 12 copies of Julian's true schedule here," I announced, the words cutting through the room like a surgical blade. "Detailed messages, explicit photos, and hotel receipts spanning from January to last night. A calculated, daily deception shared directly with his second cousin, Chloe Vance, who is currently sitting at table 2 wearing a designer dress paid for by family real estate dividends." The ballroom fractured into absolute chaos. Chloe Vance shot out of her chair, her wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering against the marble floor, a bright pool of red staining her dress. "That's a lie. She's crazy. She forged that." "The data packet includes authenticated server IP logs from Julian's personal account, Chloe," I said, entirely untroubled by her shouting. "My best friend, who is a digital forensic investigator, verified the headers 3 days ago. If anyone would like to review the evidence. The coordinator has a copy, and the rest are currently being distributed to the press tables near the entrance." The campaign manager for Julian's father slammed his portfolio shut, grabbed his coat, and walked straight out of the emergency exit without looking back. He knew a political execution when he saw one, and he wasn't about to let the splatter hit his career. Julian stared at the unsigned marriage license on the sweetheart table, his jaw slacking, his polished composure completely disintegrating. "Sarah, please, we can fix this. We can talk about this privately." "We've been talking for 7 years, Julian, and you haven't said a single honest thing to me," I said, reaching up to unpin the heavy tulle veil from my hair. I folded it with slow, deliberate care, placing it squarely on top of the unsigned legal documents in the leather folio. I looked past him, past the ruined Vances, and found my father standing up at table 19. He wasn't looking down. His shoulders were broad, his face set in a quiet, massive pride that didn't need a single word of validation from a country club ballroom. "I came here today to start a partnership built on mutual respect," I said into the microphone, my final words echoing clearly into the heavy silence. "But I will never sign my name to a family that treats honesty as a luxury and my parents as an embarrassment. Julian, you wanted an elegant show for your father's campaign. I hope the coverage is exactly what you deserved." I stepped off the stage. My heels clicked against the hardwood, a sharp, rhythmic metronome counting out my exit. 200 people watched in absolute, stunned silence as the mechanic's daughter walked the entire length of the grand ballroom, her satin train sweeping across the floor, completely untouched by the wreckage behind her. I reached tables 19 and 20. My dad stepped out, wrapping his heavy, calloused arm around my shoulders, while my mom took my hand. We walked through the double brass doors together, exiting the Vance Country Club for the last time. Behind us, I could hear Victoria screaming at the coordinator, and Julian's father furiously dialing his publicist in the corridor. I didn't look back. The autumn air outside was cold, clean, and completely empty of their lies. I got into the front seat of my old Subaru, stripped off the heavy platinum ring, and dropped it into the cup holder next to a half-empty bottle of water. I rolled down the window, let the wind hit my face, and took the first deep, honest breath I had taken in 7 years. I didn't get revenge on Julian Vance. I didn't need a scheme or a counter-lawsuit to rebuild my life. I simply stood up in the light, told the absolute truth, and walked away on my own terms. And that turned out to be the most devastating response of all.